I think we're going to start. This is, good morning everyone, welcome. This is week 3. Yeah, we're good. This is week 3 of soul work, removing pain, guilt, toxicity, and so on. So just to review quickly and get us up to speed a little bit, because what we spoke about last week is going to sort of run into what we want to develop today. So last week we discussed this concept of tshuva, not translating as repentance but more as return, preceding and transcending the world. In other words, it's a gift, it's part of the design that God made before He created the world, to give humans who by nature fail as a gift to repair, to rebuild, and to grow. We discussed the Jewish letter Hey. Hey is the letter with which God created the world, and Hey has both symbols. It has the bottom opening, which represents failure, people dropping out, but also has that window on top to creep back in. And that's why the word tshuva is actually tashuv Hey, to return the Hey, or return to the Hey. How do we do that? So we've explained last week at great length that we have our conscious self, which is our daily routine, our emotions, our cognition, the way we operate, the way we fail, where we succeed, and so on. But we also have our real self. Our real self, that's the core, our spark that never fails, which is in the background. And in order to do tshuva, we have to start from the very essence. We have to start from our purity. In other words, to really fix the last year in a very sustainable way, to reconnect with our essence, to reconnect with God and so on, we actually have to go all the way deep down and expose that spark, that pure spark that has never made a mistake, that has never actually failed, never been corrupted. And that's part of what we do in Elul, because in Elul we have to, we have to unsettle, we have to rattle the conscious self in order to open the door to get to the real self. That's what we explained last week. And that's the idea of the shofar in Rosh Hashanah, when we've unrattled the conscious self and we're ready to expose the real self, that spark, that's the shofar, that's the cry, the purity of a child crying. And that all happens with the introduction of Elul. We need to actually, as I said, we need to unsettle the conscious self by making the cheshbon, by taking stock, by confronting and challenging our comfort zone, our relationships, our spirituality, and we become unsettled. We're able then to open the door and expose the real self, which is the starting point for the process. Then after that, we go to the 10 days of tshuva, where we actually work on a plan of repairing the conscious self. But that will leave for next week. This week, I want to follow on from what we did last week, because I asked a question at the end, and I'm going to develop it now, that process of the Elul symbol, which is the discomfort, being unsettled, to really confront ourselves, can have a danger, right? Can be dangerous. The danger, of course, is that it can lead to unhealthy feelings of guilt, right? And can lead to sadness and despair. Both are very negative and toxic and destructive, right? So we need to understand, how does it work? In other words, how do we do this process, especially the first part of the process, which you can't really improve without the first part of the process on many levels. You have to confront our good things, but also our bad things, right? We have to identify, we have to be able to go through a reflection period of where we're messing up and what we can do to improve it, right? How do we ensure that process is not negative, doesn't come with despair, it's not overwhelming, we don't give up, and doesn't sort of fall into this unhealthy guilt process, which often it does, right? So I want to develop that whole idea today of guilt and happiness and how it works together, and when it's healthy, when it's unhealthy, and so on. But the answer in short is this. The answer in short is that when we confront our conscious self and we rattle the conscious self, as we talked about last week, but the idea is, the purpose is to expose and to reveal and to connect to the real pure self, right? The purity of self, the infinity of self, that part of us that never failed, that part of ourself which is our real core identity, that part of ourself that actually is our real definition, when we do that, then that discomfort, that confrontation with self, actually never leads to unhealthy guilt, if it's for that purpose. And we need to understand why. On the contrary, it actually can be extremely uncomfortable, but actually will induce happiness. Which sounds a little bit strange, but we need to break that down and to explore it. So, let's begin by revisiting something we've talked about before, but we're going to take it to a much deeper level today, and that's the concept of healthy guilt versus unhealthy guilt. So on the one hand, we know that some level of guilt or discomfort or pain even of things that we might have done wrong is actually critical. It's critical to growth. If you're not uncomfortable, then we're not going to grow. Without any guilt, we'll just be complacent, right? On the other hand, there's a huge difference between what we call unhealthy guilt and healthy guilt. So let's just go through the differences. There's a few differences. First of all, the sign, right? The sign that you're processing unhealthy guilt, which by the way, most of the time when we feel guilty, it's unhealthy guilt, right? How do we know it's unhealthy guilt? Because sometimes we can fool ourselves. We can think, no, I need to feel bad about what I've done. I insulted that person last week. I really need to feel bad about it. And the truth is you do, because you have to fix it. But how do you know when it's unhealthy guilt? When it leads to despair and nothing happens. It's an escape, right? And you see that often. You see people become very guilty about things. They ruminate on that guilt for 3 weeks. And what happens after that? Absolutely nothing. It's just you don't know what to do with yourself, so you escape into the world of guilt. You beat yourself up, you escape into the world of guilt, and nothing actually happens. The sign of good guilt is that it doesn't lead to despair, it doesn't lead to giving up, it doesn't lead to inaction. On the contrary, healthy guilt, the sign of healthy guilt is that it actually creates a bit of an urgency. And it shatters the conscious self, but it reveals the good, and reveals the purity within us, and helps us to start from the essence of our purity and to repair and to rebuild. I was just thinking the other day, there's a little book called Hayom Yom, which was authored by the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1943. And it's like a calendar. What he did was he just created a calendar for 1 year, where each day he quotes a saying from his father-in-law, from the writings of his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, and there's some beautiful things there. And I always wondered, until I sort of processed this idea and tried to understand it, there's two almost contradictory sayings in different parts of the book, right? And the sayings, both sayings surround the concept of what they call in Yiddish a krechts. You know what a krechts is? Like a sigh, like a oy vey, right? One of the sayings says, quoting from his father-in-law, that one action is better than 1,000 krechts, right? You understand why? Because the krechts doesn't so you krechts, okay, now I feel bad, you feel better, you feel bad, you don't feel bad, you do feel bad, but it doesn't bring to anything. So one action is better than 1,000 krechts, that's what he says. Another time, in another place of the book, another day in the calendar, he says that when a Jew krechts, it's a very high level of tshuva. It's a high level of returning and reconnecting. So it seems like almost contradictory, but it's not. It all depends what kind of krechts it is. When he talks about one action being better than 1,000 krechts, that's the krechts that just comes because you don't know what else to do. So therefore you just want a krechts, and that's an escape. People almost like, it's funny, they feel uncomfortable with guilt, but it kind of almost is like a therapeutic in some bizarre way. And it's an escape and an excuse not to do anything. I'm just a terrible person, I made a terrible mistake, and that's it. I just feel guilty, but I don't do anything about it. That's the krechts that we're talking about. Better do something, even one thing, better than 1,000 krechts. Yep?
It's just sometimes when you want to do something, it's motivated by alleviating your own guilt, though.
Yeah, but sometimes inspired by guilt, by good guilt. Yeah.
I just wonder if it's also more better to do something that's just to alleviate your own guilt than rather continue to do.
Yeah, because I think that's in the first passage. That's where the one action. So just do something at least. Even if it's for the purpose of alleviating guilt, but at least you're doing something. It's action, right? But the second passage is saying something else. The second passage is that a little krechts can be a very high level of what we talk about here, tshuva, because actually it's a It's a kind of the discomfort that is leading to action. It's leading to exposing your soul. It's leading to something positive, and that's a very good thing. That can come from a very deep place, as we'll soon talk. Right. So that's the first thing, right? Just the symbol of what's good guilt and what's bad guilt. The second thing is something we've talked about many, many times, and it's an interesting formula that's written in the book of Tanya, and that is, who's controlling who? Of course we have to feel uncomfortable with what we did. But are we being controlled by those thoughts, or are we controlling the thoughts? Who's controlling who? The author of the Tanya suggests an unbelievable formula for healthy guilt, which he calls mirirut, which means feeling unsettled. Right? He says, is necessary, sometimes, not all the time, not most of the time. But even when you do it, he says it has to be at designated times, right? Like, so for example, let's try this something really bad. I don't know, I transgressed, I hurt someone, right? So then I feel guilty. What happens? The next day I'm still feeling guilty. What happens the next day when I feel guilty? I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing now. So in other words, not only leading to inaction in terms of the thing wrong that I did, it's actually leading to inaction generally. Because you wake up in the morning and you're ruminating on your guilt, you don't do anything properly. Anything you're supposed to that day, you don't treat your friends properly, your spouse properly, your children properly, you don't do spiritual things, you don't pray properly, you don't learn properly. Why? Because you're just controlled by the guilt, right? So he says, yes, sometimes those feelings of guilt is important for growth, but you have to have designated time. You've got to ignore it. Get on with the job, get on with what you're supposed to doing, and designate a time to sit down and reflect on what you did, feel uncomfortable, resolve what you're going to do to fix it, and leave it. But you can't do that if you're controlling the guilt. It's a very hard thing to do, right? But what you're controlling is really good guilt, because you're actually doing it for the purpose of resolution, not for the purpose of escape and inaction, right? Okay. Thirdly, and this is something we haven't spoken about before so much, and I want to develop this idea a little bit. And I'm basing some of this on I mentioned this the first lesson, I'm basing some of this on the book on Tshuva by Rabbi Pinson. What actually is the emotion of guilt? Because we'll find a fascinating thing. You know that in Hebrew, actually, I don't know about modern Hebrew, but I'm saying classical Hebrew, there's actually no word for guilt. What's it in modern Hebrew? I don't even know. Sorry? Hashem, Ashma maybe. Yeah, but that means like you're guilty, not that you're feeling, it's not an emotion, it's more about, if you're Hashem, it means you are guilty, you've done what, right? What is the actual word we use in the tshuva journey? Charata, which is regret. Very different. Regret and guilt are actually two separate things. Charata, yeah, exactly. In Yiddish. In the Hebrew Yiddish, right? Why? Because actually guilt is not a good thing. In other words, I talk about healthy, it's a matter of semantics, but I talk about healthy guilt and good guilt and bad guilt. But the truth is, guilt is actually has a negative connotation. Why? Because guilt actually is normally connected with shame. You're embarrassed about something. Right? I'm going to take that in a very deep way soon. But, so, it's not really a process of resolution. It's an emotion about feeling, it's an emotion about feeling getting caught. Now, either you're getting caught because you did it in front of somewhere else, or you let someone down, or maybe you let yourself down, but it's about being ashamed and embarrassed. That's really what the emotion is about. And that's not a healthy thing. I mean, it's good to consider the feelings of others and so on, but it's not such a healthy process, and normally doesn't lead to action, right? So, the word charata is very different. The word charata means I'm confronting myself and I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm not embarrassed by anyone else. I'm feeling uncomfortable about having done something. Uncomfortable to the point that I need to fix it. It's very different. One's internal, one's external. Okay? Now, that internal versus external actually happens within ourselves as well. And I'm going to share with you an interesting thing. So imagine this, right? Because just to clarify this, because it's a bit subtle. Imagine you travel somewhere, right? You're going for a holiday, whatever, and you go to a place. I don't know, there were bushfires there, whatever the case is. You know, you suffer from a bit of asthma, let's say, and you didn't do good planning, and you go to somewhere, and you go to a place where there's very bad air. I'm just giving you a stupid example, but this is one I came up with. Okay? And you feel sick, and it ruins your holiday. come back, you reflect, and you think to yourself, like, that was a really stupid thing to do. It was a mistake. You reflect why that happened. You didn't research it enough. You didn't research the place. You didn't, you feel like stupid almost. You feel like, why did I do that? I ruined the holiday. I could have had a good time. I didn't. I'm talking now in a very physical sort of way. And you resolve the next time you'll ask around. You'll ask what the place is like. You'll do it better. You'll plan properly, and you'll resolve to do it better next time. Right? I'm talking about a purely self-centered thing now, but having your own realization now. Right? So, what were the feelings? What are the emotions about? Like, you're upset, maybe you were disappointed. Maybe you feel uncomfortable by the fact that you had to go somewhere that put you in pain, or that compromised you, whatever the case is in terms of your own health and so on. But guilt would be the wrong word, don't you think? You don't feel guilty. So why do you feel guilty when you insulted someone, but you don't feel guilty when you hurt yourself? The answer is because guilt is something that doesn't come from something that is you. It comes from something that is being imposed on you. Something that you forced to do. Negative guilt. It's not something that's actually part of you. You don't feel guilty about something that you were compromised because it's you. Like, you breathe. You're not told to breathe. When I'm told to do something and then I mess up, I get rattled. I get emotionally unsettled. Or I get embarrassed. But it's a negative thing because guilt almost comes with resentment. You start to resent either the other person or the circumstance, or why did I do that? You resent yourself, right? Because it's coming from something that kind of like, why did I have to be in that position in the first place? Why did I have to do that in the first place? And I feel resentful, I feel pain. It's a very negative process. But when there's something that's part of who you are, that's being compromised, you feel uncomfortable, but you don't feel guilty. It's a different emotion, right? Why am I saying that? So it's not about being embarrassed or being ashamed. There's nothing to be embarrassed. There's no one to be embarrassed of. It's about you. I was unable to breathe. So who are you embarrassed of? I was compromised. The me. I was compromised. Therefore, I have to protect the me better next time. Whereas guilt always is something, I'm embarrassed of God, I'm embarrassed of another person, I'm embarrassed and I'm shameful, and I feel shame, and I feel the shame normally leads to some sort of resentment, because the whole thing is kind of being placed on me. It's not me to begin with. In Judaism, right, there's this whole idea that God gave us the Torah at Mount Sinai. And the Talmud tells us that when He gave us the Torah, there's a metaphoric sort of description in the Talmud. He held the mountain over us. And He threatened us, so to speak. That's what it seems to be saying. He says, I suggest you accept the Torah, otherwise, I'll drop the mountain, right? And we're kind of forced into it. And then the Talmud goes on and says, I'm telling you the simple reading, but I'm going to tell you the deeper meaning in a minute. And then the Talmud says that kind of the Jews almost had like an excuse of not to keep the Torah until Purim. What happened on Purim? Purim, there they weren't being forced after the whole story. It says they were so thankful and grateful for the miracle that God had saved them, although it was a hidden miracle, but they were... So on their own volition, they recommitted on their own to the Torah's principles. But in Kabbalah, we read a much deeper explanation to this whole idea. And that is that God didn't pick up a mountain and want to drop it on us, right? It says in Kabbalah, a mountain is almost a symbol of love. Very often we find a mountain being a symbol of love. It's big, it's tall, and it's like reaching out, right? What God did before we get the Torah, He revealed Himself. He revealed His love for us to such an extent that we were so attracted to Him, we almost didn't have a choice. Like we said, yes, for sure, because such love, right? But in a subtle way, even with love, it still wasn't our choice. We were kind of swept into it, exactly, right? So still on some level, we were committed to the Torah and its principles, but it wasn't really us. It wasn't really our choice. Purim was very different. Purim was a very dark time. Purim, God didn't reveal Himself at all. In the Megillat Esther, we've studied this many times, the God's name doesn't even appear. You have to really look for the miracle. You have to really understand that it was actually miraculous to begin with. Right? Yeah, the Jews were happy, Haman was gone, but how did that happen? It could be easily interpreted as a natural thing. It wasn't natural, of course. It was miraculous, but they had to discover God, and they did. This time there was no revelation. There was no attraction. They did it on their own. It was their choice. Ever since Purim, we say that what we're able to try and reach and try and be is that when we choose to do the right thing, we're not choosing it because it's been imposed on us. We're choosing it because it is us. It's our choice. I'll just read you a little bit of a piece from Rabbi Pinson's book. He says like this: on a deeper level, in a Torah-filled existence, there's no room for guilt, as the Jewish desires that we consciously choose the Jewish standard of conduct as our own, hence not feel it's been something imposed on us from the outside. Being committed should not feel as it's an external way of life imposed upon us with no choice in the matter, but rather we should be open to feel how it resonates within us and complements our very own personality. It is the way it becomes our Torah, our values. And he says there's a spiritual movement upwards and inwards from a place from I must to I am able to I am. This is me, right? Now what's it got to do with guilt? Because once it becomes us, right? Once it becomes who we are, then it's like I went to someone and I couldn't breathe. The reaction is not guilt, it's discomfort. And when I reflect on it, I feel uncomfortable with the fact that I was in that situation not able to breathe, and therefore I make amends to do it better next time, right? Because when I reflect on something about that compromised my own health or my own breathing, I'm talking about something that's not, in other words, I'm supposed to be able to breathe. That's me, right? The same thing. The cheshbon, the rattling of the conscious self. Here we go back to our discussion last week. When we rattle our conscious self during the Elul period, this Elul concept, right? And I reflect on how was I in the year gone by? Was my relationships good? Did I treat my spouse well? Did I treat my children well? Did I treat my siblings, the stranger on the street? Did I engage in some sort of learning? Am I using my brain in the right way? Did I engage in some sort of spirituality, in some connection to a mitzvah? All these things, right? And we confront it and we're honest and we go through our successes and our failures and we start to feel uncomfortable. Why are we doing that? Not to be embarrassed of anything. We're actually doing that to reveal, as we said last week, our true self. And our true self is that. Our true self gives us the ability to say, this is me, this is what I want to do. I didn't do it all the time, so I feel in pain, but I now reveal that I really can do it. Because part of me that's the identity of who I really am. My connection to God is who I am, not being imposed on me, it's me. It's that godly infusion in me, it's who I am, who I am one with. And therefore I know, I dig deep down and I expose that real self, that deep spark within me, which gives me the power of infinity and it gives me the power to fix it. It's a painful process sometimes. It's a confronting process if you do it properly. But it's not a confronting process that's sad. It's a confronting process that's uncomfortable, leading to a confident path. It's leading to a resolve to be committed and resolute that I am going to, and I have the ability to, and I can fix it. It's a very different process than guilt. Charata, yes. Regret, yes. But I regret consciously not doing something in line with who I really am. That's a big difference. Yes, I messed up on my conscious self, but what I'm regretting is doing something on my conscious self that's not in line with who I really am. And therefore I'm resolved, but I know who I really am. And when I reveal who I really am, I can fix it, because I have the ability, starting from the point of non-failure and purity and pristineness and connection, I can now rebuild using that spark. I can resolve it, I can fix it. Very different. That's the real krechts. That's the krechts that's part of tshuva. Yes, it's an uncomfortable krechts. It's charata, it's regret, but it's revealing something resolute. It's revealing the ability to really do it. This difference, by the way, between living with something that's kind of not me and therefore feeling embarrassed and being involved in negative guilt, as opposed to exposing who I really am, that's something that's me, goes to the core of a very, very fundamental Jewish idea. And that's the idea of free choice, right? Bechira. Why? Because if living by true values is something that's not really me, then who said the me has full choice to engage in it or not? And that's where the negative guilt comes in. You see, that's why I don't know this is me altogether. Why is it being thrust upon me? Like I'm overwhelmed by it because it's something else. It's something beyond me, greater than me, outside of me. Not really me, not fitting with me, right? But when we go through the process that we've been discussing, which is rattling the conscious self to reveal the real self reveals that I am that concept. I'm not being forced upon him. That's who I really am. And I have that purity to repair and rebuild, and I have that purity to always resolve and to fix and to improve and to grow. That means I always have the choice. It depends on me. It's me. It's not in conflict with me. Oh, are you okay? You want some water?
I'll just leave it.
No, it's okay. You just have water. So, up to you. Whatever you're comfortable with. Let me just say it another way, right? You see, often the tension or the negativity comes because we're always busy with our conscious self. So therefore, let's say I got angry with someone, or I'm doing something really wrong, and I feel guilty. I feel guilty because I feel that thing is separate to me, because my personality is one thing, and this thing, and now I'm being told to go against my nature, which we do on a conscious self as part of growth. But there's that constant negativity, that constant negative tension. Once I reveal my essence, my real self, then actually it's my choice. It is a choice. It's a hard choice sometimes, because when I reveal my true self, what I'm revealing is that it's not true that I'm in conflict with the value that I'm trying to live by. I am that value. Does that make sense? I am what it is. I am those values that I'm trying to live by. I need to work with my conscious self. That's
you wouldn't have been those values. You wouldn't have felt the guilt.
correct, but it's a different kind of guilt. It's not a guilt of I'm one way and something else is pushing me another way and therefore I'm in constant war. No. It's a guilt because I know that deep down I am that value, and I'm just being compromised on my conscious self, and I have to work with it, I have to resolve that. But at the deep down, therefore it's my choice. And that is the fundamental principle that Judaism emphasizes to such a degree that at the end of the day, there are things that make it difficult, but you can never blame anything. It's your responsibility. And here I want to just digress for a moment and share with you something very beautiful that I learned just recently. I have to give credit to my wife, actually, that showed me this idea. She showed me a book that talks about this. So it goes back to a story that I mentioned before, but not the second part of the story. So the Talmud tells us about a person. His name, the Talmud refers to him as Rabbi Eliezer ben Dudaya. It sounds like Rabbi Eliezer ben Dudaya. That was his name. But actually, he wasn't a rabbi at all initially. He was a perfect and absolute gangster that had done everything wrong in the book. Transgressed everything, immoral, everything. And the Talmud says that he had fallen so far that it's a bit of a graphic story, it says that he paid a huge amount of money and traveled very far distance to engage with a new prostitute. That's what the Talmud says. This was the story. And when he was with her, she said something to him kind of like disparaging, like, your life's kind of very empty. And something triggered within him. There's a whole Kabbalistic explanation of why he was triggered, because he was a reincarnation or someone, whatever, but he was triggered and in a positive way, and he said, wow, it's true, my life is completely empty. And he went away, and it says there that he sat between mountains and he started to cry. And he wanted to do tshuva, and he wanted God to have mercy and compassion on his soul. So the story goes the following. He said, this is how it went. This is the imagery that the Talmud paints. It says like this. He says, he turned to the mountains and the hills and he says, mountains and hills, ask for mercy ask for mercy for me. To which apparently the mountains replied, no, we actually have to ask for mercy for ourselves. Can't help you. He says he turns to the heaven and the earth. Heaven and earth, ask mercy for me. They said, ask mercy for you, we have to ask for ourselves. Then he says, sun and moon, ask mercy for me. He said, no, we have to ask for ourselves. So finally his last glitch is he says, stars and planets, ask mercy for me. I said, we can't. We have to do it for ourselves. And then he said, Ein hadavar talui elabi. So obviously, I got to do it myself. And he started to cry. That story didn't end the way we need to do tshuva, because it says in the Talmud that he cried to such an extent that his neshama actually left his body. But a heavenly voice came out and welcomed him into the world to come, and gave him the title Rabbi. Welcome Rabbi Elazar ben Dodai. Okay. The second part of the story needs its own explanation, but it's not for now. What I wanted to share with you is from this sefer that we found, it's quoted from the sefer, which I think is a few hundred years old. What is this imagery? What does this mean? He turned to the mountains, the stars, the sun. What's going on there? So this commentary explains in the following way. That initially he felt so bad, but he was kind of transferring the blame somewhere else a little bit. In Kabbalah, in Chumash also we find it, mountains and hill are a symbol for parents. Because in the parsha of parents, it says when Bilam couldn't curse the Jewish nation, and he said that this is a great nation, they come from Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the patriarchs, the matriarchs, he used the imagery of mountains and hills. He says they come from high mountains and high hills as the mothers and the fathers, right? So he turns, so this is what's happening here. Elazar ben Dodai turns to the man and says, parents, maybe it's something to do with you. Maybe it's my parents, the way I was brought up, which is very common in our society. Everyone blames their parents, right? But it's an old story. He was doing it also. So the parents answer, no. We actually weren't perfect. True. We weren't perfect. We tried our best. We got to deal with our own issues. We got to confront our own mistakes and failings and successes and so on. But that's not why you led an empty life. You can't blame parents. It might have had an effect. Of course parenting has an effect. As parents, we need to know that it has an effect on children and do our best. But when someone chooses to live an immoral life, you can't blame parents. So he tries something else. He says heaven and earth. What's heaven and earth? The environment. The environment. Where we live. I've often heard people tell me, Sydney's a very tough place. It's not a spiritual place. If I was like in Muncie, where there's so many shuls and so many shivat, the people are learning and there's so many shirim, then I'll probably be learning and more spiritual, more committed. But Sydney is very tough. It's a beach city, and at the end of the day, it's very materialist. Doesn't work. The environment's got to take care of itself. Why? Because we have free choice. At the end of the day, it's us. It's nothing to do with anyone else. So then he tries something else, and he says, sun and moon. What's sun and moon? So we know that the sun and moon, this is what the commentary says, a beautiful thing, refers to our livelihood. Either poverty or affluence, either one. Because why is the sun and the moon? Because sun and the moon is what helps the plants grow and agricultural grow. It's got a lot to do with the ecosystem and so on, right? So he says, you know what, I think maybe it wasn't my parents, maybe it wasn't the environment, but it was God. He gave me too much. Like he spoiled me. Because sometimes that's a test. There's two tests that the commentaries talk about. People are tested two ways, either with poverty or with extreme affluence. Both tests, right? The Talmud talks about it. The Talmud actually says a different contrary. It's very cute. The Talmud says everyone is obligated to study. To study Torah, everyone is obligated, right? And the Talmud says, don't make any excuses. Some people make an excuse, I'm so poor, I haven't got time. I'm scratching around for to pay the next bill. The very wealthy guy says, I've got to take care of my business. I haven't got time to learn. So Talmud says you can't make an excuse for a different reason. I'm just digressing here for a moment. Talmud says because Hillel, the great sage Hillel, took away the excuse of poverty. It's the whole story. Hillel was incredibly poor. And yet he still found time to learn and became the great sage Hillel. It was a whole story that he wanted to get into the study hall, and there was a watchman at the door and he was charging to get in. There was you had to pay for half a coin. You had to pay to get into the lecture of the great sages Shemaiah and Naftalion, who became Hillel's teachers. And one time, and so Hillel used to just try his best, and he would earn the equivalent of one coin, and he gave half away in order to get into the lesson, right? And one time he couldn't even make that much, and he came to the lesson, and the guy wouldn't let him in, and it was winter. But he was determined, right? So Hillel climbed up on the roof. There was a skylight there, and he listened from the top, and it began to snow, and he was so engrossed in the shiur. Don't try this around, but he was so engrossed in the shiur that he didn't even notice the snow, and he froze. And as the morning came, they were giving the shiur the whole. It was Friday night. They were giving the shiur the whole Friday night. These two great sages, and suddenly the sun was supposed to rise, and it was dark inside because the sunlight wasn't working. They looked up and they saw a person. They went and got him down. They revived him, and Shema and Naphtali told the watchman, he comes for free from that one, right? But whatever all those details are, but that was Hillel. He was determined to make it work. And then Rabbi Lazar ben Hurkanus, the Talmud says, was another great sage, that his wealth was like incredible. I mean, he owned cities and he owned farms, and amazing that the Talmud actually describes. And he became the great sage. He found time to study, found time to grow. So Rabbi Lazar ben Adai, he turns to the sun and the moon. He says, maybe I lived this life because you gave me too many choices. You spoiled me. I had too much. I had too little. I said, no. So finally, and this is coming back to our discussion. Finally, he says, well, nothing else, but maybe it's my personality. The stars and the constellations. We've done this before. The Talmud says if you're born in a certain constellation, it has an effect on your personality. The day of the week you're born, under which star you're born. Every hour Kabbalistically has a dominant star, a dominant constellation. The Mars, it says like if you're born in the Mars hour, it's a bit of a problem. You might be a bit of an aggressive person. All these kind of things, right? All true things. They might be true. All about the conscious self. It's all about the conscious self. My conscious self has a personality, and that personality is challenging. He says, it wasn't myself, it wasn't my problem, it's my personality that God gave me. So he turns to the stars and the planets and he says, come on, help me out. And they all say no. Until Rabbi Lazar ben Adai realizes it's all nonsense. Not nonsense, it's difficult. But ein hadavar talui elobi. It's dependent on me. I got to cry and I got to open up my real self. I got to find where I have that part of me that doesn't have that test, that doesn't have the affluence, that's not affected by my parenting or the environment, all that stuff. And it's from that deep spot that I need to choose, because I can choose. Because at that point, that's who I really want to be, because that's me. I'm not being pushed by anyone, I'm not being affected by my personality, by my parents, they all have an effect, that's true. They all create difficulties or successes, that's all true. The Talmud says it, it's true. If you're born on Tuesday at a certain time, you do have a bit of a different challenge. If you're born on Friday, it's a different challenge. Whatever the case is, all true. All nature and nurture. But you're not bound by any of it. Why? Because it all lives on your conscious self. Your real self can choose differently. Because your real self is the real you. And at the real you, you have complete free choice. Because that's who you really want to be. You just got to choose to do it, choose to reveal that part of you, and then choose to override and to work through and to improve and to refine the conscious self. So that makes it clear? Yeah, we got it? Okay. Now, once we understand the charata, the cheshbon, the unsettling of the conscious self that way, we can understand how this is not a contradiction to doing it with joy at all. In fact, we are told that Shuvah has to come with great joy, because it's a gift. This ability each year that God gives us to really reflect and to improve for the coming year, it's a gift. And therefore the Zohar, before we go into any deep idea, the Zohar says a very simple thing. He said that when you have a soul, you actually are able to carry two opposite emotions at the same time, which means you're going to be unsettled if you do a real cheshbon, if you reflect properly, right? If you reflect properly, you are going to be unsettled, that is true. It's going to cause discomfort and even pain. And maybe you'll cry, because why did you create this distance between you and God, and why did you do these things that you did? Maybe. But at the same time, you can be happy at the same. You can do that with happiness. You can do that with happiness, knowing that this process is amazing. This process is not to cause pain. The goal of this process is the ability of confronting myself and growing. Because I can. Why? Because the real me can make the choice. No matter how many times I made the same mistake, it's still not the real me. The real me can make a choice to do something different. That's an amazing thing. So it is a process of discomfort at certain levels, but it's also a process of happiness, right? That's why it's interesting. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. If you look in the Sfarim, if you look in the commentaries that talk a lot about the idea of tshuva and reflection and stock taking and Yom Kippur and atonement and all that thing, you see opposite themes. There's a pasuk, there's a verse that tells us about Rosh Hashanah, Gil'u bir ada, which means rejoice with a bit of trembling, right? They're called days of awe. They're serious days. They're not negative days. They're not sad days. They're not scary days. They're serious days. Yeah, we've got to take them seriously. If you want to grow, there's a serious part to it. That serious part is the reflection, being honest, confronting ourselves, revealing that real self, then going to the conscious self, as we'll talk next week, and dealing with the issues and making a plan for growth. That's all hard work. So there's a serious part to it. But it doesn't mean it's not simcha. We know that on Rosh Hashanah, on the one hand, there's this like seriousness to it. It's called solemn days. The real joy comes out on Sukkot. That's when we celebrate the whole thing. But even Rosh Hashanah itself. In fact, we know that in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, in the Second Temple, at the beginning of the Second Temple, when Ezra, the great prophet Ezra, came back and he assembled the Jewish people, and the story is told in Tanakh very clearly. And it was one Rosh Hashanah that he assembled all the people at the very beginning of the Second Temple. A lot of the Jews in Babylonia hadn't come back yet. It was just a community of Jews in Israel, and some of them weren't doing so well spiritually. And he got them together, and he told them they need to fix. They told them that they need to improve. And they took it seriously. It worked. He inspired them, and he was really, and they were really sort of shaken and inspired, and they started to cry. At that point, he turns to them and says, "No, al te'atzvu, do not be sad. That wasn't my intention to make you sad. In fact, it's because it's a great day, it's a beautiful day." He says, "Now go home." And he said the words, beautiful words in Hebrew. He says, "Ichlu mashmanim mushtu mamtakim." Eat fatty food and drink sweet drinks. In other words, celebrate. Why? Ki chedvas Hashem hi ma'uschem, because the happiness of God is your real strength. Ki kadosh hayom ladneinu, because today is a holy day. Meaning it's a day of joy. Serious, full joy comes out later, but hard work maybe. You've got to be inspired, yes, confronting sometimes, but it's a great gift. So therefore there's got to be that process of happiness at the same time. We know that, first of all, we know that happiness is something we always have to be, right? There's a verse that tells us, if do it Hashem b'simcha, you got to serve God with joy. But what's the real joy coming from? The real joy actually comes from this. The real joy comes if we do tshuva properly, if we have the right krechts, not the bad one, right? And we understand what the whole process is, as we talked about last week and today. The process of tshuva, the discomfort of the process of elul that sometimes happens when we confront ourselves, when we know that that's all to lead up to reveal who we really are, that should bring the greatest gift. That's the greatest happiness. To actually finally have a process that God gives us the ability to reveal our real identity, and to discover that our real, through the shofar blowing, coming from the cry of the child, as we spoke about last week, that the real gift, that the real point of this is to discover who we really are, at our core, at our base, at our foundation. And we discover, we expose that at our real foundation we are okay, we're pure. God loves us unconditionally. We can connect, we can rebuild, because at the essence that's who we are. We've never failed at the very essence. We have failed on a conscious level, and we need to fix that. That comes later. But the knowledge that all our failures and all our mistakes and all the things that we might have done wrong are our responsibility, but they're not us, that's a discovery that should elicit tremendous joy, even though it's hard work at the same time. And that's why charata, let's call it today, right? Charata, which is part of the theme of Elul, coming with the cheshbon, is not at all a contradiction to being joy. And if it is, if it gets overwhelming and someone says, "Wow, this is all too much for me," you've gone down the wrong path. And that's an awareness we have to have. That's an awareness that we do have to tread carefully into the world of reflection and taking stock. That's why I said last week also that it can never be done obsessively. People do this obsessively is normally because they're headed towards negative guilt. People that are always questioning themselves, and I'm terrible, and I'm this, and why do I always put my foot in my mouth, and why do I do this, and why do I insult someone, and why am I angry, and why am I jealous, and why, right? And they do this all day, every day. It never leads to any action. It leads to just self-criticism and real unhealthy guilt. Why? Because it's not that process. It's not the process we've been talking about. And therefore that does lead to despair, that leads to depression, and leads to a downward spiral. But if we do it with the right perspective, and the right time, when we're supposed to do it, when we know it's the right thing to do, without being obsessive about it, us controlling the process rather than the process controlling us, and the whole purpose is to reveal the true self, that's called for great joy. That's why we have this dichotomy in the month of Elul also, and Rosh Hashanah, we have this idea. On the one hand we say God is in the field, we spoke about this, right? And in fact even in Elul, before we get to Rosh Hashanah, we know the famous line, Anila dodi v'dodi li, right? Those of you coming tonight will hear this as well. It's the only time we refer to God as dodi. Dodi means my beloved. Almost like a couple who are in love with each other, right? Funny, we're given a month where we're now supposed to confront and look back at the year and then identify our successes, but we identify all our mistakes as well at the same time. And yet there's this unbelievable closeness between us and God during this time. You'd imagine that not. It's like, we've messed up a little bit. Maybe He's not so happy with us. No, on the contrary. He's coming to us and asking us and welcoming us back, because He says, I know who you really are. At your very core, I know you're still connected. At your very core, I know you're completely pure. So now I just want you to go through that process and reveal that purity, and then work with your conscious self and repair and rebuild. Take one step towards a better goal. Take one step toward the values that you really believe in, that you really are, not just believe in. So that's why this process has a very big connection to the concept of happiness and simcha, and therefore tshuva. We learn that the idea of tshuva and simcha actually go right hand in hand, because we reveal this unbelievable opportunity, and that's what's got to be seen as, not a scary process. Oh, and I was going to say something, I couldn't remember what I was going to say. Now I remember. That's also why, and I've said this before, why an incredible thing happens on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, which we'll talk about much more next week, but actually now, once we've revealed the real self now has to inspire improvement on the conscious self, which is really what we do in the 10 days of Tshuva and Yom Kippur. That's why on Yom Kippur we do talk about our failings. We don't do it in Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah we're just talking about our real self, right? But on Yom Kippur we do talk about our conscious self. That's why we stand all day in shul and we say, I've done this and I've done that, and please forgive me and I apologize. I'll try to do a little bit better in the future, and so all that kind of stuff, right? But the strangest thing, it's that the commentaries talk about this, that if you go into a shul and you hear the vidui, the confession, right? It's sung as a song. It's like the most bizarre thing. Right? If anyone who knows nothing about what we're talking about or wasn't Jewish, came into a shul and understood Hebrew, he thinks a bunch of lunatics. They're singing the song, I have stolen, I have been bad, I've lied, I've been not spiritual. You guys mad? Go into a room, close the doors, close the curtains, sit in a dark room and cry. Like, what are you singing this for? Right? But that fits into the whole process. Because next week we talk about even confronting our conscious self and working on it. It's hard work, but it's part of the same gift. No, on the contrary, it's the gift of improvement. God knows who we are. He designed us to fail. Right? He just wants us to work on it. That's fine. So He wants us to work on it, going through the process. Stock taking an Elul, revealing the true self in Rosh Hashanah, and then working on the details. The 10 days of Yom Kippur, which we'll do in detail next week, and then celebrate on Sukkot and Simchat Torah, which will be the 5th week, right? But it's a gift. So yes, we're actually honest with ourselves. We don't just sing it because we don't know what we're talking about. I mean, some people do, but that's not a good thing. When we say it in Yom Kippur, we have to be honest. We actually know, we have to actually identify which part of the list belongs to us, right? There's a long list. Not only Hashem Begadnu, Al Chait, and we do this, right? If you look at the English Siddur, there's lots of stuff that could have gone wrong, right? And if you look at it, you'll find, I shouldn't say you, me, all right? I find things that belong to me. Yes, it's true. This is me. I did this, but I'm still singing it, right? Because I'm resolved, I'm committed, I want to fix this because God has given me that gift. So it's actually, I'm confronting it, working on it, but at the same time singing it, because it goes together. So let's just internalize that for a few moments. So get comfortable a little bit, and close your eyes. And let's just begin, as we always do, by focusing on your breath. I want you just to think about feeling the sensation of breathing in and breathing out. Just do that for a few moments, become a bit aware, focus your thoughts, and just focus on that rhythm of breath, of in and out. Each time you breathe, it's an expression of the neshama, as we know, because breathing is neshima, expressing the neshama. When you breathe in, think about connecting to your soul. When you breathe out, feel a sensation of letting go of the stuff we need to let go of. So just breathe abdominally for a few moments, and when you breathe in, think about connecting deep. When you breathe out, think about letting go of toxicity. Just tune into your breathing pattern and you'll realize that every time you breathe out, you start a fresh breath. You start again, connecting to our soul. Toxicity doesn't define us, and that's why we can let go of it. When I breathe out, I connect back to my purity of my soul, to who I really am. I realize there is stuff to let go of, but it's not painful. It's work, but not painful. The breathing pattern is rhythmic, it's beautiful. Just think about that for a few moments. Just breathe in and out. Letting go, breathing out is as beautiful as breathing in. It's all part of the same process. It's all a gift. It's all part of revealing the real us. All part of life, vitality, connection. So when we take stock and we confront ourselves, just hold on to that thought. It's not something different. It's not an uncomfortable place. It's work, but it's all a gift. Everything's a gift. That process is a beautiful gift to allow us to connect to who we really are and repair and rebuild from there. Okay, we're going to leave it there, and just as I said, next week, we got 2 more weeks of the series. We're going to talk about the whole 10 days on Yom Kippur next week in detail, and then the joy in this actual open celebration of Simchat Torah and the Sukkot after that. I want to just mention also, I've been making announcements a lot lately, but this is the time of the year we make lots of announcements. So I'll just put it out there now, but I'll send out plenty of WhatsApps and emails and stuff. But as we did last year, the second day on Rosh Hashanah, we're going to do a special service. It's going to be in Shelley's house at 10 o'clock. Shelley always wanted a shul in her house, so. But it's a different kind of service. Those of you there last year know that it's much shorter than the regular one, but it's an authentic service. We'll have the shofar, we'll do it together with explanations and meditation, and those of you who weren't already anyways going to a shul, I'm not taking anyone else from shuls away, but if you weren't going to a shul second day, this is a beautiful opportunity. So we'll send out the details a little bit later. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful week.
Thank you.
What was the fourth? I can't remember what the fourth excuse was. You've got the parents, the environment,
Wealth and poverty, and my personality, my stars, my ups and downs, yeah.